The Ultimate Power: How to Unlock Your Mind, Body, Soul Potential by Ken Vegotsky. Spoken by Derek Mihalicz. Prologue. My story. Nearly dying as a way of bringing you back to life. It has been 12 years since I had my near-fatal parasailing accident. 12 years of great pain, sorrow, and tears, as well as laughter, growth, and triumphs. I am a 42-year-old, partially paralyzed, divorced father of 2 kids. I have no job in the traditional sense, but I do have a desire to share with you the lessons I have learned in striving to survive and thrive again after my near-death experience. This is the story of the journey in which I discovered the mind-body-soul connection. My personal transformation and the miracles of daily life that I became aware of evolved after my accident and during my recovery. As you and I embark upon this journey of self-discovery, a renewed sense of awakening wells up inside me. I am honored to share with you the secrets of my successful recovery and inner growth. By sharing the keys to unlocking the mind-body-soul connection, I will achieve my mission in life and help you become fulfilled. The greatest honor is to share with another person the miracle of believing and achieving. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. Part 1. Lessons from a near-death experience. Chapter 1. Life's Journey. The jet's engines screeched as it came to a halt on the tarmac. Inside, the crowd of weary business travelers stood wrestling with their heavy winter coats while they waited to leave the plane. I felt the emotions of my first day at school, a mixture of fear and excitement. Days before, I had been basking in the luxurious warmth of Los Angeles. That December, I had played tourist in the City of Angels for the first time during the 4 months I had commuted there from Toronto. It was to be my last time in Los Angeles for a long time. Lainey, my lovely young wife, had flown out to the coast to join me and celebrate my 30th birthday. We had stayed at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel near Rodeo Drive, a minor earthquake being the only disturbance in an otherwise uneventful visit. Perhaps this was nature trying to warn me of what was to come. I was facing a major personal business decision: move to Los Angeles or leave Roadrunner Jeans Manufacturing Limited. I believed that a successful business operation demanded I relocate there. My partners did not share this belief, even though 4 years earlier I had transferred from Montreal to Toronto and successfully expanded our operation there. By the age of 30, I had learned that the key to success is to live, breathe, and undertake all projects with an all-consuming passion. I had learned that what one was doing did not matter as long as one was committed to it and persevered. Such is the wisdom of being on top of the world. On paper, I was worth a lot of money, but paper has no value, I was soon to discover. People and their love, support, and friendship are the true treasures of life. I had been traveling from Toronto to Los Angeles once a week while Lainey stayed in Toronto. She was a real example of a woman of the 80s, running a home, working at a job, and studying to become an accountant. She was a self-motivated, intelligent woman. This had its advantages. I could fly from city to city, work at a grueling pace, and not be missed much at home. The whirling sound of the plane's door opening signaled my arrival in Montreal. Suddenly, I was yanked from my dreams of Los Angeles and unceremoniously pulled back to reality. A bone-chilling December wind rushed in to greet me, attacking the parts of my body not blanketed in my lambskin wool coat. Winter had arrived in the city with a vengeance the day before, I was told by a flight attendant. First the storm, then the aftermath of cleaning up. I struggled with my carry-on bag and briefcase as I made my way through the terminal to a snow-covered world of idling cabs. Entering the cab, I gave the driver the address in words as sharp and crisp as the morning air. I leaned back in the warm car and reminisced. 4 years earlier, I had moved to Toronto from Montreal. In that short time, I had developed the sales territory from thousands of dollars to 10 million in wholesale business. I had risen from the ranks of salaried sales rep to a partner in what was now a $50 million plus clothing manufacturer and importer. At the time, the largest importer of moderately priced fashion goods from the People's Republic of China. Our success in business was to be our downfall. I needed to clarify my future. The business travel was taking its toll on me and the business areas I was involved in. I believe that fate was what you made it, in business at least. I was in the manufacturing and import clothing business, and my strength in sales was the key to my success. The customer always came first. It was simple, and for me, it worked. The cab pulled up in front of the company head office. Roadrunner Jeans Manufacturing Limited was emblazoned over the entrance. Lugging my bags, I left the taxi and made my way along the recently shoveled narrow path to the front door and into the reception area. After a brief hello to Susan, the receptionist, I put my bags in my office and proceeded down the hallway to the president's office to announce my arrival. The president and 51% owner was sitting, phone in hand, feet propped up on his desk as he waved me in. I took a seat opposite him and waited. A few minutes later, he called in another partner. The president knew why I was there, and as always, he was prepared. It was a lesson I had learned well at his side. Success is 90% preparation. Greetings done, we got down to business. I told him that I believed the business's future success depended on my moving to Los Angeles. I learned that if I did what I loved and was committed to it, the money followed. The president offered me back the sales position I had before taking on the Los Angeles assignment, without the power to make changes I felt necessary. This alternative was not acceptable to me. It did not take long. I immediately quit. Months later, I found out about the problems the company was having. The president and vice president of finance shared very little information with me about the firm's financial condition. Since I was living out of town, there was a tendency on management's part to overlook my desire to be informed, even though I was a partner. However, it was just as much my fault as theirs. Traveling tends to distance one from the realities of daily business struggles. Money, new cars, and perks kept coming, so it had been easy for me to rationalize that things were okay. I stayed overnight at my mum's, then made my way back home to Toronto the next day. During the following months, I used my successful sales past to acquire the rights to sell other clothing lines in the Toronto area. In the meantime, my lawyer played telephone and letter tag with my partners and their lawyer in an attempt to get money for my shareholdings in the business. Delegating this responsibility to my lawyer at a high price, time, energy, and thousands of dollars. I pursued other sales opportunities successfully. Since February, I had done my homework. By the end of June, I'd obtained the rights to sell 4 clothing lines, planned my sales route, and set up the business. The samples from the lines I was representing would not be available until mid-August. I had to wait until I had the samples before I could start selling. Everything was in place, and at last I could take a break. Lainey and I took the opportunity to go on vacation and chose to go to Nassau, Bahamas. Everything was looking great again. My life and future were at last back in my control. Fate, the accident. August 2nd, 1982. The parasailing dock was a short boat ride from our hotel. All day long, we watched as one person after another floated through the air, tethered to a brightly colored sail that was made into a parachute and pulled by a motorboat. The dreams of my childhood flew with each person in the sky. All morning long, the parasails seemed to beckon me, teasing my 30-year-old fantasy of flying. At long last, I knew I could and would. Shortly after lunch, the motorboat came to get us. As it pulled up to the sand dune off the beach of our hotel, Lainey and I got on board. A gentle breeze caressed my body as we sped off to the floating dock of tourists, patiently waiting their turn to soar like eagles. A group of 20 of us sat calmly on the dock that was attached to the sea floor a short distance from the beach. The gentle bobbing motion seemed to lull everyone into a state of relaxed anticipation. The tourists sat wearing their life jackets, while 3 staff members on the dock controlled the comings and goings of the group. It was Lainey's turn. She stood up after the person before her landed. A large metal self-closing hook was placed through a metal ring attached to her life preserver. About 200 yards from the dock, the motorboat floated as Lainey was given last-minute instructions. I listened intently to each word. My turn was next. Hold on to these handrails. If you want to go to one side, gently tug on the handle on that side. I'm going to signal the boat to rev its engines before it takes off. When my hand falls, start running slowly. The boat will do the rest of the work for you. Have a good flight, said Bob, the staff member, his tanned hand raised, then fell. The boat's engine revved higher as the craft started to pick up speed, pulling the slack out of the water-soaked rope as it distanced itself from the dock. Suddenly, Lainey was airborne. Only her legs were visible, dangling below the billowing parasail as she gracefully ascended skyward. My excitement increased with each moment. The seconds seemed like hours as the boat made a large circle, pulling Lainey behind it. "You're next," Bob said as his hands checked the clasps on my orange life jacket. He lifted the large ring and gave it a gentle tug. "How much do you weigh?" he asked. "About 170 pounds, I answered. He stared into my eyes, clearly doubting my answer, then grunted and said, "Sit down. I'll tell you when to get up. Wait until I call you." His message delivered as it had been thousands of times before. He turned his back on me and looked up at Lainey as she was being pulled back towards us. Moments later, the boat's engine quieted as it revved down and the craft began to drift forward. The idling sound from the engine was interrupted by the rope attached to Lainey's life jacket as it clanged onto the dock and snapped through the metal tethering ring. The boat took up the slack from the rope as it drifted forward. Lainey landed safely and with a little help unhooked herself from the life jacket. She looked completely exhilarated as she sat down. Bob signaled me to stand and take her spot. Swiftly, the instructions he had given Lainey were repeated for me. I nodded acknowledgement, and suddenly found myself floating upward into the clear blue Nassau sky. I could fly. Peter Pan! Eagles! I was one with the birds as I felt the rushing wind on my face. The parachute sail flapped behind me as it caught the man-made breeze. Suddenly, a jolt hit me. The wind had filled my parasail, and the rate of my ascent rapidly increased. I was taking my childhood flight at long last. The dream ends. August 5th, 1982. I awoke for a moment. I felt my body bouncing in the confines of a metal-fenced bed. I did not know where I was. Lainey's eyes peered into my right eye. My left would not open. It did not concern me at the moment. It was all a dream. Moments earlier, I was soaring high in the sky, and now nothing seemed real at first. I knew I had died. I had been embraced by a great void in a place of total harmony. It was awesome. I mumbled a few words to that effect. Lainey's head shook a no as she began to talk. The words did not make sense. I felt compelled to tell Lainey what to do, in spite of battling a searing sensation in my eyes that distorted my vision. My mind and body sought and at last found refuge in the peacefulness of unconsciousness. I was in a drug-induced world, free from external signs of pain in the minds of the hospital staff and Lainey. The first message, August 6 and 7, 1982. I had touched the hand of death and found it wanting. I was not ready to die yet. The dreamlike images immediately after the accident beckoned to me, seducing me into an inner serenity. I had briefly visited a world of awesome tranquility where I was at one with the universe. Like a splash of ice water, the drugs drew me back to a distorted version of reality. The vision I was blanketed in became a jumble of pain, emotions, and fear beyond anything I had ever experienced. Control had been wrested from me. I was at the mercy of those around me. They were trying their best, but all I wanted to do was scream out and cry for release. "Please stop!" I yelled. No one heard. The overwhelming pain was winning. "Please stop!" I begged. My mind and body were in agony. "Stop, damn it! Stop!" The pain rolled on with ceaseless intensity, like ocean waves as they reach their peak, slowly, persistently growing bigger and bigger. I was drowning in a sea of pain, unaided by the very drugs meant to help me. My screams could not be heard. They were inside me. At the time, I did not realize it was my mind that was yelling. My voice had been disconnected from my mind by the drugs and pain. It was there, but I could not use it. It was many years before I understood that this pattern kept repeating itself. The love and kindness of others had become a test of my willpower. Like an opiate, the outside world promised to help, but the relief, if any, was temporary, and then the need was greater than before. In fact, the answers were within me. It was the gift of the message I received at that time that made it possible for me to go on. I knew I had a mission in life. Exactly what it was became obscured by the outside world's intervention. If the nurses, doctors, friends, and family had allowed me to feel my pain without intervention, the healing would have come sooner. At last, I can say, I forgive them. They knew not what they were doing. The Gift, August 8, 1982. I awoke. My world was no longer focused within, as it had been moments before. My thoughts were jumbled. Confusion and turmoil had taken over. I knew who I was a moment ago, but suddenly I had been thrust into a world of the living. Like a newborn child, I was reborn. I started to turn my head to see the light beaming in front of the window on my right. Ow! I screamed in agony. I could not turn my head. Fear flooded my consciousness. What the fuck is happening? I yelled. Across from me, I could see blurs of white floating in my direction. The nurses had heard my cries. Something was blocking the vision in my left eye. I reached up with my right hand to try remove it, but before I could reach it, a hand gently grasped my arm. A blurry face covered my field of vision and said, "My name is Beth. I am your nurse. The doctor will be in shortly." She gently squeezed my arm. "What's happening? Where am I?" "You're in the Nassau General Hospital," she said in a thick island accent. "The doctor will answer your questions as soon as he gets here. Your wife is also here. They have gone to get her. Now take these pills and you will feel better." "Water?" I asked as I reached for the offered pills. My throat was dry. I put the pills in my mouth and waited for the water. I tried to put the pills in my left hand so I could hold the water glass in my right hand. My left hand wasn't where I wanted it to be. Where was it? I wondered as another wave of pain hit me. "Here's your water," Beth said, passing me a cup with a long straw in it. "Put the pills in your mouth and take a sip of water, slowly." Beth bent the straw towards my mouth. "Ow!" I yelled. A searing pain stabbed at my left side. My body withered in agony. I gulped the pills and sucked the water, hoping to quicken my escape from the hellish pain. A look of satisfaction covered Beth's face as she turned and left, her job done. It seemed like an eternity, yet it was only moments. The pills had taken effect. I twisted my head toward the door, looking and praying for a familiar face to grace it. Where is Lainey, I thought, as another jolt of pain seized me. God, please help me, I begged. My cries went unanswered as more pain consumed me. Please, I pleaded, please help. Tears obscured my vision, mingling with self-pity as I suffered and waited. Lainey's face suddenly appeared, floating in an outburst of my tears. My glasses, I said as the agony rolled on ceaselessly. For a moment, I had lost control of my speech. The simplest movement triggered the pain's ever-increasing intensity. My mind was numbed. Anger, fear, a mixed blessing in disguise that kept drawing me back to the here and now. It was a long while before I had relaxed enough to talk coherently with Lainey. By then, the doctor had arrived. "Mr. Vegotsky, I am Dr. Cassis. How are you?" he asked. My voice trailed off as I was seized by another spasm of pain. Dr. Cassis waited patiently for me to regain control. Between the outbursts of agony and semi-coherent speech, I was able to paint a picture of who I was and some of what had happened to me. Lainey filled in the rest. A shudder passed through her body as she recounted the details. My descent from the parasailing flight was too fast. The parasail and I were tethered to the boat. The boat had stopped and was idling in the water. Bob had signaled the boat to start moving again. By then, the rope had been put through the tether ring attached to the floating dock. My body crashed into the dock, bounced, and ended up in the water. When they fished out my lifeless body, I was not breathing. First, they resuscitated me. Then they rushed me to the hospital. My memory of these events was blocked. The drugs given me and the journey I had taken during my death created too much chaos for my mind to sort out. Whose fault the accident was did not matter. I knew that it had happened for a reason. What that reason was, I lost in the depths of my mind in pain. I realized that I was just as responsible for what had happened to me as were the folks on the dock. In fact, it was beyond all our control. It was meant to happen. At the time, I had lessons to learn and a gift to receive. I later realized the lessons are repeated until learned. I took little consolation in this idea as my struggle was just to get through the next moment of pain that I knew would soon come and did too often. Forcing yourself to stay in control is just another form of panic. Much later in my life, I realized this. I learned that it is better to let events move at their own pace than to forcibly intervene. That lesson is something I now remember every day. I discovered that the answer to panic, tranquility, was within me. Ultimately, the awareness dawned on me that everything happens for a reason. 10 days later, I was released from the hospital. My left eye was still barely functional, although the scab that had covered the left side of my head had almost disappeared. Physically, I looked okay to the outside world, with the exception of my left arm hanging in a sling. I had no control over it. It was separated from my shoulder by a measure of 2 fingers, held in place by stretched skin, muscles, sinew, and of course, the sling. The slightest movement would send a dagger of pain through my entire being. Temporarily, I would lose control of myself, grit my teeth, and curse. I cursed a hell of a lot. The walk to the hotel, only yards from the hospital, exhausted me. I was just getting used to breathing with one lung. My left lung had collapsed as a result of the paralysis on the left side of my diaphragm. There was little the Bohemian doctors could do for me. Their outdated equipment and medical techniques did not allow for much more than their taking a series of x-rays, so poor in quality they were of little value, except to show that something had been badly messed up inside my body. My condition was stabilized. I was armed with only a bag full of pills and my prayers for release from the pain. The pills, prayers, and Lainey were the only things of value to me at the time. That night, Lainey and I had to stay at a hotel. She chose a cheaper one than the one we had been staying at since our stay had been greatly extended, and the costs were mounting quickly. Airline officials insisted I stay at least one night in a hotel before they would allow me to board the plane. Otherwise, I would have to take an air ambulance. Fortunately, the doctor had prescribed a drug that dulled some of the pain, enough for me to put up a good facade. The drugs and the desire to be home helped me get through the next 24 hours. By then, I had an aversion to anything or anyone touching my left side. The slightest contact sent shock waves of pain coursing through my side. Desperately, I grabbed and squeezed Lainey's hand whenever I could. It was my one hold on sanity. This simple human contact kept me centered on the task at hand, getting home, seeing my doctor, believing he could fix my body. I was desperately trying to divorce my mind from my body to little avail. Hope and despair mingled in ever-increasing intensity that night and the following day. The drug-induced sleep was a relief, a prelude to my descent into a living hell. Home at last. Drugs, booze, and modern medicine. Here I come. Mid-August, 1982. Mom had come in from Montreal to meet us at the airport. She looked visibly relieved when she saw me. To her, I looked basically okay, just slightly battered from my accident. I will always be grateful that at this time my body appeared normal. But inside me, it was a different story. The atrophy had already started. Dr. Prober, my family doctor, saw me within hours of our arrival home. I treasure his kind and caring ways to this day. He is a truly compassionate soul, his waiting room always filled to capacity. He is frustrated only by his inability to help others with the limited tools at his disposal. The first thing he did was stop me from taking the pills Dr. Cassis had prescribed and gave me a safer prescription in its place. The Bahamian prescribed drug is no longer dispensed in Canada as it causes kidney failure with continued use. It was the beginning of a seductive journey into drugs, a liaison brimming with promises, but at a price I would come to recognize as too high. I recall my mom walking with me from the car towards the emergency entrance at North York General Hospital as Lainey parked the car. The doors to the hospital swooshed open electronically. I felt like a wreck as Mum guided me to the receptionist, then to a seat. Dr. Prober had called ahead, and they were waiting for me. I barely had a chance to settle into the chair when the emergency room receptionist began to recite a list of questions. The dehumanization of Ken that started in Nassau began again and was to continue for a long time. Name, clack, clack, clack. Insurance policy, clack, clack, clack. Birth date, clack, clack, clack. Next of kin, clack, clack, clack. On and on and on it went. The cold efficiency of the entire hospital seemed embodied in this one person. I wanted to yell, "I am Ken! Help me, please!" I knew I would not be heard. I was too numb and too scared to even care. She typed, asked, typed, and droned on for what seemed like eons, but was only minutes. I was beginning to feel more like an object than a person. I tried to answer between bolts of pain. Tears welled up as I realized the futility of being human. My mum and Lainey answered most of the questions. I relinquished this responsibility, since the pain made talking almost impossible. Without an opportunity to go home and collect some personal belongings, I went straight to a couple of weeks of let's poke, prod, and find out what's wrong with this guy. I found that the tendency of the medical community to dehumanize and objectify patients robs them of dignity and the will when it is most needed. I felt more like a money machine than a living, feeling person. Bank of Ken seemed to be emblazoned on my forehead. I believe this is the medical profession's way of distancing themselves from other people's pain. This I can understand and now accept. It is their coping mechanism to help them deal with the traumas they are confronted with daily. At the time, however, I found this attitude hard to accept. Each day, I felt more dehumanized and betrayed by the very people, system, and institutions that were there to help me. The doctors swiftly determined the x-rays I had brought from Nassau were of little value, so they did not know the exact nature and extent of the damage to my body. My pain and fear intensified. A dash of reassurance would have been appreciated, but there was nothing with which to reassure me. I would have settled for a little white lie, anything to hold out hope. A team of doctors started assessing me. The extensive and unknown complications required significant and laborious effort before a full course of action could be mapped out. Dr. Prober was my anchor. He visited me frequently in the hospital and took the time to explain what his colleagues were discovering about my condition. Now I had a neurologist, lung specialist, and a host of others working on my behalf. X-rays, needles, pills, spinal tap, more X-rays, more needles, more pills, ECG, EKG. The list seemed endless. And for good measure, they tested my breathing capacity. Breathing was a problem. 14 years of smoking and now only one functioning lung combined to take a heavy toll. Yet, to this day, smoking is the one addictive relationship I choose to keep. I have quit for 2 years since, but repeatedly find an excuse to start again and quit again. It's a game I play with myself, a slower game of Russian roulette. I will stop playing this deadly game soon. 2.5 weeks later, I was released into the care of Lainey and that of a home worker who would assist with my daily necessities until I started functioning more independently. This was the next phase of the medical path my doctors had chosen for me. The specialist. Dr. Bay's office was in St. Michael's Hospital. The dim green hallways had been well traveled by many a soul. The building was mid-50s vintage, boxy, and devoid of any character, except perhaps the opaque window pane door marked DR, AR Bay, MB, FRCSC, an intimidating set of letters whose meaning I did not understand. They lent an air of superiority to the doctor that further dehumanized me. Lainey opened the door to the small waiting room, which boasted 3 elegant, old-style hardwood chairs. The office was an organized collection of medical efficiency, light green in color, old wooden desks, 2 secretarial staff, and a receptionist. Definitely the trappings of an important man. The most important doctor for me. His hands held the fate of my left arm. Name, health card. I had grown weary of this list of repetitive questions asked by all doctors' receptionists. I would answer mechanically between the always present stabs of pain in my left side. After the first few times, I struggled to do it for myself, even if the receptionist was impatient. It was now September. Summer had ended with me in one hospital. Fall began with the prospect of entering another one. I was on a merry-go-round of a never-ending series of appointments with doctors and other healthcare givers. I was searching for answers to my problems, and as long as there was the promise of hope, I would call, write, walk, or do anything to get rid of the pain and improve my condition. I was determined to conquer this pain, yet the more I persisted, the more I found it conquered me, and the worse it got. The seeds of an addictive relationship with drugs and doctors had been planted. My dependency on the outside world was flourishing, feeding on my quickly fading inner strength and dignity. Lainey and I were escorted into Dr. Bay's tiny examination room. "Take off your shirt. Here's a gown. The doctor will be with you shortly," was the sing-song litany of a mechanical human as the nurse exited the room. I was becoming accustomed to being treated as an object. I was beginning to beat up on myself, and that was a really addictive relationship, all the more frightening because I had begun to enjoy it. Becoming a victim of circumstances is easy in the world of modern medicine. I felt as if my world had turned inside out, and it had. I felt as if I was there for the medical establishment's need and not my own. A tall, rugged man in a white lab coat entered, chart in hand. I noticed his long fingers, like those of an artist or a surgeon. In this case, he was both. He glanced at me as he continued to read the chart. I had been reduced to no more than a few words on a piece of paper, with some X-ray photos thrown in for spice. He looked up and said, "I am Dr. Bay, and you are Ken Vegotsky." Why was it that none of these doctors seemed to have a first name, I thought, again feeling more like a thing than a person? "Yes," I stuttered as a shot of pain interrupted my thoughts. "Take your sling off and show me what you can do with your arm." Mindlessly, I did as he asked, winced with every moment, grappling with the sling, the pain, and what felt like a surreal situation. Swiftly, he examined my arm and shoulder, recited his list of questions, and then said, "Get dressed and wait in the reception area." He left before I realized the examination was over. The definition of Ken Vegotsky had been reduced to an upper torso, left side brachial plexus injury. No longer was I a man with a painful injury, but a case study, a medical anomaly, and a neurological orthopedic freak, devoid of either sensations or feelings. Minutes later, Lainey and I were ushered into the inner sanctum, and we settled into the doctor's chairs. We waited expectantly as Dr. Bay examined my chart, the X-rays from the spinal tap lighted from behind by the glass panel on his wall. "You've had a brachial plexus injury. It appears that nerves C4, 5, and 6 on your left side were avulsed at the roots and C2, 3, 7, and 8 damaged. You're a perfect candidate for an intercostal nerve graft and transplant." He continued speaking, but I heard nothing. I was a candidate. My prayers had been answered at last, I thought. "Some of the pain may be reduced when we operate and remove the scar tissue," he continued. There was hope for relief. I blanked out thoughts of all else. Dreams of a tomorrow free of pain had taken over my mind. "A nerve from your left leg will be put into your left side. This is meant to help you have some control over your arm." I'll be able to use my arm again, I thought. It could take 2 years before we know if it works. 2 years. A small price to pay for a working arm. "I'll schedule you for surgery as soon as possible." A hint of excitement caught in his voice. His direct manner and extensive experience were evident in the efficient way he handled me. Standing in the hallway moments later, I found myself somewhat satisfied and hopeful. A whirlwind of emotions, thoughts, and prayers mingled with my tears. At long last, a foundation for hope. The operation seemed simple enough. Dr. Bay was going to take nerves from the left leg and put them in my chest. The nerves would grow so that my brain would again be able to communicate with my biceps. It was like replacing a broken steering wheel and column in a car so that the driver could again control the vehicle. The drive home seemed to fly as I shared my renewed dreams of being whole again with Lainey. I talked incessantly in spite of the shots of pain lunging through my left side. My voice was like a roller coaster riding up and down the waves of pain. Talking had become a way to distract myself. September 1982. My neurologist, who didn't say or do very much, gave me a copy of Dr. Bay's letter, and excitedly I reread it. My mind had become so dulled by the drugs and pain that I had problems concentrating. So I started asking for copies of everything. This way I could refer to what was being done for me and have the time to think about what was happening. My body was being battered so constantly that I sought constant refuge in sleep. I was being exhausted by the pain at every level, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally as well. My spirit, too, had suffered. A friend had lent me a VCR and tapes. The science fiction movies I loved, and even the adult tapes, didn't keep me awake. A big brown couch from my bachelor days had become my second bed. Nothing, absolutely nothing, stopped me from falling asleep. Except the pain. I read and reread Dr. Bay's letter between stabs of pain. It was his game plan for my future care. He was the first doctor in the world to perform this particular surgery for my type of brachial plexus injury, and was listed as one of the top, if not the top doctor for the type of injury I had. My eyes teared over as I read about my past, present, and future health care. My prayers and hopes were alive once again. Ken Vegotsky. We will achieve this by doing an intercostal sural nerve graft. Looked good to me. I will bring him into the hospital right away. Getting better. And in the next 2 years, consider the question of a shoulder fusion and Steinler procedure to the elbow. Yes, I thought. I'll be okay in 2 years. He will be the 150th brachial plexus operative case that I have performed in the last 10 years. Best personal regards, A.R. Bay, M.B., FRCSC. Patient to be admitted September 22nd, 1982. I was reading a book about surgery and what could happen. By coincidence, it had been written by one of the staff members of St. Michael's Hospital, so I had an even greater connection to its contents. The facts were not encouraging. For the year quoted in the book, 1,600 operations had been done at the hospital, but 3 out of 100 patients had died. Fear took hold of me. I had no plans, but decided it was time to reevaluate what was happening. The medical community is rather tight-lipped about itself. As a patient, I was discovering this rapidly. When it came to surgery, I realized I was handing my life over to someone who would not have to live with the consequences as much as I would. The doctors are gods in the minds of the public, and they get to bury their mistakes. I was not comfortable with giving away control of my life, and I discovered they were not comfortable with relinquishing their power. Already I was on the 5th type of pain pill, rapidly ascending the ladder of medications. None of the pills eased the pain, and each new medication took away a little bit of hope. As each pill failed, my will to live was gradually eroding. Increasing despair and depression were becoming a daily part of my life. More medications, more failures, more pills, and a sense of desperation that was almost my undoing. The visits to doctors increased, as did my desperation. The doctors could not do anything for my pain except prescribe a pill and get rid of me. It was a vicious cycle. I saw other people on drugs so strong that they had to give up control over their lives to the side effects of the drugs in an attempt to escape their pain. I was terrified. Who is it that made the medical machine so powerful? The question kept haunting me. Today I realize it is you and I who give up our responsibility for our health. The traditional healthcare givers willingly accept this gift. It means a life of luxury and a lack of immediate accountability. They are just doing what is asked of them to make the decisions for us. My seeds of self-empowerment were planted by my fears, and they were beginning to take root. Soon they started to grow.